Hi, should I just go ahead then?
Sorry, I couldn't get myself unmuted. So, on behalf of Malvern Books, I'd like to welcome all of you to our reading featuring authors from the independent press Four-Way Books. So, readers this evening will include Susan Buttenwieser, Charlie Clark, and Brian Komei Dempster. So, just so everyone knows, should have time for a Q&A after the readings. So if anyone's interested in asking a question to any or all of the readers, please put that in the chat box and they'll have the opportunity to see those questions and then can address them after the readings. And then we'll put in a little plug in for Malvern Books. If you're interested in buying the books and you're in Austin, it's real easy. You just can call us at 512-322-2097 at Malvern. And you can pick it up curbside or schedule an appointment to come in and browse at the store. So Joe's at the store right now. Joe is the owner of Malvern. And if you're interested in making a call and purchasing a book, that's great. Those of you from out of town, if you'd like, when we have books available, we're happy to ship those to you too. So you can give us a call. All right, our first reader will be Susan. Susan Buttenwieser's writing has appeared in numerous publications. She teaches creative writing in New York City public schools and also teaches to incarcerated women. We Are Lucky with the Rain from Four-Way Books 2020 is her first book. Susan?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Malvern Books, so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited to be reading with Charlie and Brian. And of course, I really want to thank Four-Way Books for publishing me. They just are the best. And Sally, who's on this call, saved me so much. So thank you, Four-Way Books. And I also just wanted to shout out to my friend, Jay Gardner, who took the photograph on the cover, which I think is a really beautiful photograph. So I'm going to be reading, in the collection, there's includes 3 stories that are connected, and so I'm going to be actually reading the last story, which for the parents is not a children's story. But anyway, the only thing I think you really need to know is the protagonist is a guy who's an underemployed comedy writer, and the thread through plot is that he's been trying and hoping to get a job on a new sitcom that his more successful friend has been helping him with. So this is called Evidence. The double swinging doors flap behind you, announcing your presence as you come in out of the oppressive sunlight. The bar is afternoon empty. The few people on stools nod in your general direction. You order a shot of tequila and take your usual spot where the bar slopes around, right by the bags of chips, pretzels, and the bartender leaning against the bottles. You always come here by yourself, and while no one quite talks directly to you, you are not left out either. The bartender's brother is always here in the late afternoon with some other guys from his job, cleaning up crime scenes after the LAPD have taken all the evidence. You started coming pretty regularly on Mondays because they had good stories from the weekend, stories you told yourself you would use in a script someday. You are here even though it is Thursday, but it's been a bad day. After months of meetings and rewriting a spec script, the television producer finally told you that he's not going to hire you for his new show. Or rather, his assistant left a message on your cell phone early this morning, thanking you for your interest in the position, which has now been filled. You swallow the shot, order another one with a beer chaser, and then another. The bartender just looks at you and pours the tequila while moving a toothpick from side to side in his mouth. The place smells strangely comforting, a cross between your grandmother's home and an alley, ammonia, piss, and people who drink so much they sweat liquor. Christmas lights are up all year round, and a variety of beer signs hang on the walls. A few pictures of regulars are scotch taped to the bar back. You like to tell people you go to this bar. Whenever you drive past with friends, you always point it out. After your 4th shot, the crime scene cleaners arrive. The bartender puts down his TV Guide crossword puzzle, his face loosening as he fills pint glasses, beer spilling onto the counter. Hey, Frank, what you got for me? The bartender says to his brother, wiping up the foam with a stained cloth. Dead woman eaten by her own dogs. Frank passes around the drinks. Her 15 dogs, says one of the cleaners who is bald. You have another shot and a beer while they describe the dead woman's home. Dog shit everywhere, and they had found dog carcasses and a dead cat in the kitchen. Although she had lived there for years, there were no photographs, barely any furniture, not even a bed. We could not figure out where she slept. Frank sucks down his beer. I think that was the worst place we've seen, the tall, curly-haired one says. What about that hoarder who killed himself? Remember the rats in that place? The bald cleaner stands in front of them. He talks the loudest and always manages to make himself the center of attention. Don't even mention him. It took me months to erase that from my memory. Frank shuts his eyes and leans over while the others laugh. You are envious of the crime scene cleaners, the combination of routine and horror that is their lives. You wish you had a job with a title, something easy you could tell your mother about and she would understand, instead of explaining over and over that you do actually have an agent and work a lot, but there's never anything to show for it. I thought you wrote sitcoms, she said when you told her that a special about hair bands you worked on 2 years ago will finally be on TV. You order another shot, telling yourself not to say these things out loud. A prostitute who is always here in the late afternoons, like you, monopolizes the jukebox, playing one Journey song after another. She starts arguing with one of the drug dealers who sells coke and crystal meth out of the toilets. As far as you can work out, one of them owes the other money. You start to have a lot of trouble keeping your head upright and decide to rest it for a minute, but the bartender slams his hand on the bar. No sleeping. Look at the kid, Frank says. They all call you that, although you are older than them. That's impressive. Not even 6 o'clock yet. Don't even think about puking on my bar, the bartender says. You nod at him and then you're on the floor. Frank and the bald cleaner lifting you up. You're not sure how long you've been down, but the prostitute is still shouting, Journey still playing. Hey buddy, better get you home, the bald cleaner says. You live nearby? Sort of, you mumble. He asked for your car keys. I'm gonna take the kid home, he says to Frank. Follow me, would you, in my car? You try to make your legs move, but they feel like they have a life of their own, and you're merely floating above them. Frank and the bald cleaner each have you by an arm, holding you, leading you out of the bar and down the street towards your car. They open the passenger door and deposit you inside. Where you live, buddy? You're slumped over, but manage to give them the address and rough directions. They slam the door shut, and you watch them confer with each other, look over at you, and laugh. You pass out, waking up at a stoplight. The radio must be tuned to the classic rock station because Led Zeppelin is playing. I fucking love this song, the bald cleaner sings along with it, his index fingers beating the air. You don't even know the name of this man who is driving your car. At each red light, you wake up, your head jerking forward when the car slows down. You keep forgetting where you are and what is happening. You look over again at this strange man. Who are you? You ask, unsure if you have really said this or if it's only a thought. At one point, you feel like you're going to throw up, so he pulls over, but the nausea passes and you lie back against the headrest, managing to stay awake the rest of the way. My girlfriend lives near here, the bald cleaner says, one hand on the steering wheel, the other crooked outside the car window. You think how nice he smells, especially considering what he does all day long. You almost wish you could keep going, drive around all night along with him, listening to classic rock. You feel safe with this man you don't know. He looks like he always takes care of everything. He's singing again, and you imagine him doing this while he shaves, right before climbing into bed with his girlfriend. He probably buys her flowers every week, surprises her with gifts when she's least expecting it. The kind of guy who visits his mother on a regular basis, can fix cars and leaking toilets, has a million friends he's known since kindergarten. And then you are on your street. He pulls up in front of your building. It has never looked shabbier than it does right now. You were thinking of asking him and Frank in for one more drink, not wanting the evening to end quite yet. The wife is going to kill you, huh, kid, he says. So you decide against the invite, thank him for the ride, and he hands back your car keys. Once inside your dark apartment, you walk around, unsure what to do next. You grab a beer, spread out on the couch with the remote, and fall asleep. The television is on when you jolt awake, still wearing your jacket, your hand wrapped around the bottle, beer spilled everywhere. Your phone is ringing somewhere. You move over to a dry part of the couch, take off your clothes, and throw them on the floor. Your desk is in a corner of the room next to a filing cabinet that houses all of your years of work. Spec scripts, sitcom ideas, pilots, game shows, a road trip flick, an unfinished horror movie, Research on hair bands, surfer punk bands, skater punk bands, Minneapolis bands, the LA scene in the late 1970s, the Manchester scene in the 1980s, the influence of drugs and rain on music in the latter part of the 20th century. Except for occasional freelance jobs, no one has seen any of it. No one has sat in a movie theater or on their couch and been entertained or moved by anything you've done. On the floor are the printer and a package of blank paper waiting for more. You get up and go to the window. Standing there in your damp boxers, you watch the cars moving between various destinations in the city, people going in and out of the 24-hour convenience store, the laundromat across the street. A glimpse of the sunset filters through palm trees, the only clue that an ocean is a few blocks away. Otherwise, you could be anywhere. If everything would stop just for a moment, you might be able to hear the Pacific, the rhythm of waves breaking apart on land. Thank you.
That was great. That was really very wonderful, Susan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, our next reader will be Charlie Clark. Charlie Clark's poetry has appeared in New England Review, Ploughshares, Threepenny Review, and other journals. He studied poetry at the University of Maryland. He has received scholarships from Bread Loaf Writers Conference and was a 2019 NEA Fellow in Poetry. He lives here in Austin. Charlie will be reading from the newest employee of the Museum of Ruin from Four-Way Books 2020, his debut collection. Charlie?
Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's really exciting, humbling, and nerve-wracking to see as many familiar faces as I'm seeing. Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to read from the book. There's not a project book. There's not like a single unifying theme necessarily, but a lot of the poems do touch on or circle back to music, art, popular culture, that kind of thing. So, if there is sort of a through line, I guess it's like my interest or obsession with these different things. So everything I think that I'm reading tonight touches on art or culture in some sort of direct way, like some sort of specific piece of music or an artist or whatever. So I'm just going to jump right in. The first poem is called An Apple Waiting to be Carved. In 1892, a man awoke wishing his name meant detour on the way to pleasure, because the angel wings he sprouted in the night, though useless, came with the most arduous requirements for care. His neck grew long and exhausted, always having to reach his face around to peck away the chiggers in the grit. He went through the streets wrapped in so many gray scarves, people mistook him for a cloud. Though he was more than just a font of gloom, he translated Medea and the Bacchae into French. The scripts, while obviously the work of an amateur, were warmly received. Other things happened. Possibly the most important being that when he died, his bones came to rest upon an English heath. Henry Moore, age 11, walking lost in one brown chill of spring, already convinced he would never adequately render a single human face, found the bones, mistaking them for the dead branches of a tree that had tried in its sprouting to turn human. It was like watching fire, Henry in his later years said of this moment. It was like watching fire, then becoming fire. Suddenly, you could make everything as you do burn. And moving right along, this is Elegy to a Black Bear Head, poorly stuffed and mounted. Whoever did this must be, I'll just start over. Whoever did this must be kin to that matador I saw booed out of the arena for not basking longer in the task. Why else would your snout be sewn in that hasty, ragged line and set off center? Your eyes are two wool holes with nail heads for pupils. When I peer into the rust of them, I can't even see an oblong version of myself. Bear, if this is an elegy, you ought to have a name more specific than Bear. Not that you care, but I'm going to call you Lou Reed. because whoever made him quit working with his face still a bunch of half-done lumps of clay. Also because he's one whose output illustrates how art is not getting what you want. Art is getting only what he decides to give you. Lou Reed, you give me the impression that a career spent so close to killing only becomes more intolerable as it goes on. Even if one is elegant, thoughtful, and perfect at it, after a while, one's limbs are going to revolt. Lou Reed, this is what I think. When the taxidermist hammered those nails into your eyes, it was the final step in his coming to hate anyone who could look at his life's work and not regret being human. Once he finished up with you, he left his studio. He walked to a lake where a pair of swans were doing circles. He liked the elegance of their bodies on the water. He gave thanks that the way they mate for life makes these creatures no less adamant and cruel. First, he fed the swans the crackers he had brought. When those were gone, he let them have his hands. I'll take a quick water break. And the next thing I'm going to read it in certain ways is about two great icons of Texas, cattle and the 90s metal band Pantera. It is called Ranch Hand Blasting Pantera in the Cow Pasture. To their bones, it must seem like strange wind. He's listened with them for 3 years now. The only effect it's had is that when the song's cut off, he hears a ring rather than their murmur. It's that much less rebuke. He thought it would move through the herd more like when he drives among them a few bars faster than he should. Headlights like wet blotter shining on their hides. Only in the low and whirl of such privacy does he watch his hands become two thick pistols, giving back to heaven its little bolts of thanks. Walking through the pasture, the fact that he knows people who claim to see loved ones' eyes stare back continues to confuse him. He stares and sees the colors of the uniforms it was in a past he did not disclose on his application, too often his duty to make clean. He stares and sees the shale of rain clouds, or smoke rising from some far grass patch whose location is vague but no less difficult for him to believe in beyond the rudiments of its burning. He stares and sees the illiterate that for 3 years now he has dreamed of, sees the color of his tongue as he receives his death papers, papers he understands immediately even though he cannot read, because they are king's words, meaning they have been delivered, sealed in a gaudy wine-dark wax, meaning they are already everywhere, meaning you can burn them. You can burn the paper or the vellum or whatever they arrived on. You can burn that iota of the kingdom, and still its words will go on ringing. Each night for 3 years now, he has dreamed of the illiterate doomed by the king's pleasure. Each morning for 3 years now, he has woken to flanks of stale cornbread, these farting cows, and this music that he loves. This love he caws, slapping the closest one, seeing how well this, the latest, most benign form of hardness he has tried on, works. After 3 years of praising it, he knows it never will. 3 years, bleak to bleak to bleak, bone to bone to bone. He believes his kingdom will never deliver him from these cows. Their days together comprise layers of gray, wet grass and his high mockeries. As loudly as he can make it go, syllable after syllable, the word respect tattoos the air as though the air were an eager wall of flesh. Call it pleasure. In the flesh of the ear, this breath that lingers even as it vanishes. All right, and This poem is it's called Giving Stuff Up. One friend decided to forego sugar for a month. Another, the word wept. A third quit therapy in favor of praising the aubergine tinge of the clouds that served as backdrop to the tree limbs falling through his mother's yard. Sometimes I want to give up living by lists and information, yet I still want to tell you how this morning I watched a man launch some kites on a beach. When the wind had a good hold of one, he'd take his lighter to its string. He must have doused them with gas beforehand because the flames ran fast, caught the kites, and the ensuing red shreds frothed upon the vapors. Listen, if you've never heard about the time Shakespeare got drunk, snuffed the candelabra, and in its dark tried to wrestle every member of his cast, that's because damage had paired with sorrow even then. That fiasco was nothing. Where he lived, the wind could change direction, and for 2 whole weeks, the house would smell like gas. That's half of how he came up with the mist for Macbeth's witches. The other half was theft. After the headaches passed, everything in those fumes seemed like a dream. Even weasels lolled in the grass like pets built out of licorice. I don't know how he invented the words gust or radiance in such haze, but I'm glad for their perfection. The modern match was perfected in 1805. Before that, every burn meant tinder, flint, and steel. So that man igniting kites still could have done it by the Thames in 1597, although I like to imagine whatever material he'd have used to build them proved clumsy in the river's wind, every flaming body rising no more than a few yards before it plunged. Or maybe the fault lay with the wind. Listen, seeing them through the window, Shakespeare claimed the first one as his son. The rest became the angels he renounced, hearing thereafter only human tongues. All right. All right, I think I've got time to read 2 more poems, so I'm going to do that. This one is called My Last Conversation with Mary Jane Bailey, and it is for my dear departed grandmother, Mary Jane Bailey. And it's one of those poems where the title is the first line of the poem, so I will repeat it. My last conversation with Mary Jane Bailey was about the taste of buckshot and baked swan. I wanted to remember more, but couldn't. Someone suggested bloodletting. Someone else suggested several hours of ghost talk. I suggested nothing. Picture this. Picture her with a rifle posed beside a Buick. Picture her taking someone's stray blast in the chest while quail hunting in 1942. Picture how she dressed her wounds and drove herself over hours of knocking Idaho backroads to the nearest doctor's house. There was a war on, after all, though when isn't there a war on? Every act amounted to a sacrifice. Tell me, Mary, which of my actions counts as preparation for life during wartime? Yes, the inconsistent stretches and push-ups. Yes, the quiet watching in the night. No, the amount of toilet paper I use each week. No, all my fawning over music. Not even napalm death, machine gun etiquette, or life during wartime. No, the writing of poems. When Creeley called Coke lightweight, or rather when I came across this while reading someone's gloss on the poetry wars, it sounded like Creeley believed his poems could chop wood, start fires, inflict wounds. In poetry, the goal is always to inflict wounds. So say the vagaries of some strange muse. I do terrible things and claim I'm only following orders. Picture these stanzas leavened with dead elephants. Picture the madman setting fire to the tree. Picture yourself. Picture this misfortune, to be alive in words other than your own. All right, so, yeah, all right. I'll just read one last poem. Yeah, thank you all for coming, and thank you to Susan and Brian. It's fantastic to get to read with you guys and to be a part of the wonderful four-way family. I've read and loved their books, I think literally for 20 years now, for decades, and it's phenomenal and strange to actually be a part of it. So it's, yeah, thank you to Four-Way. This is called Amateur Hour. What do sad songs remind you of? The clouds here are beautiful in the manner of my wife's hands. They are pleasures with strange limits and change color quickly. In this way, they are like most beautiful things. Take songs. In the car, when my wife turns the volume knob, it's to make the sadness louder. During the commercials or the jockey chatter after, I worry I'm depressed. But just because I might be depressed doesn't mean I'm serious. To be serious is to have something unwavering inside you. And oh, how I waver. I'd write anything so long as it was beautiful. It's beautiful to touch either of my wife's hands. My wife's hands are warm as flagstones set out beneath the sun. When I touch them, the ringing in my ears becomes the tuning of viola strings. I think it was something like this that made Andre Breton write Free Union, but his enumerations get tedious. I'll limit mine to my wife's hands then. My wife's hands invented the word abode. When she folds them, my wife's hands are tighter than the onion where all time goes. One day it snowed and my wife put her hands inside the snow. They came out flushed as the blood in the heart of a swan. When she put them to my face, I could not feel my tongue. Thank you.
There we go. All right. That was great. Thank you very much, Charlie. I really appreciated that. So our next reader will be Brian Komei Dempster. Brian's debut book of poetry, Topaz, which was published by Four-Way Books in 2013, received the 15 Bytes 2014 Book Award in Poetry. His poems have been published in journals such as New England Review, North American Review, Ploughshares, and TriQuarterly, along with various anthologies, including Language for a New Century, Contemporary Poetry from the Middle East, Asia, and Beyond, from Norton in 2008, and Asian American Poetry, The Next Generation, from the University of Illinois Press in 2004. He is a professor of rhetoric and language at the University of San Francisco, where he serves as director of administration of the Masters of Arts in Asia Pacific Studies program. He'll be reading from his most recent book of poetry, Seas, which was just released this year from Four-Way Books. Brian?
Thank you so much, Becky. And I'm trying to get rid of the sun that is streaming into this space. I'm not sure if it's distracting. So how's that? Okay, maybe if I lean back. Okay. So Becky and Joe, thank you so much for having us virtually vis-a-vis Austin, Texas. Thank you to Tracy and your team. As you know, Susan and Charlie said, thank you so much to Four-Way. And got to give a shout out to Martha, Sally, Ryan, and of course, Clarissa, who helped organize this events with Malvern Books. And I have to say, Bridget Bell, who's an amazing proofreader. So thank you, Bridget. I'm going to read some poems from Seas. And I'm going to try, Charlie was mentioning the idea of an arc, and I'm going to try to give you some sense of that arc through a short reading today. So the first poem I'm going to read, the book really centers around my son, Brendan, and he's here today, but luckily in the house, the main house, and he's nonverbal, has epilepsy. He's now 15 years old, but this book was really written over like a 14-year period up until the present. So a lot of the poems are about his younger life. The first poem, Brendan's Key, attempts to, characterize him. So I thought it'd be appropriate to start with that. Brendan's Key. An invisible cage, we feel him locked His quiet bangs against us. He taps our hands. Right, yes. Left, no. Drops the ring of keys at our feet. Car ride, now. His trail shadowed, we follow clues. Thoughts shining through him. Coins, spoons, falling, clanging. We pick them up. His heart, a small jar of lost things. A silver window. Light trapped, he touches sun on glass. Closes and opens 1,000 doors. So what the book centers on is not just my amazing son, but my relationship with him as a father. And it tries to be very honest and forthright about that relationship. So this next poem is about, in a sense, being someone who relies on language with a son who doesn't have language, but also being the ancestor of those who were incarcerated in 1941, 1942 in camps, such as my mother, who was a baby at the time. So the idea of seized then is obviously epilepsy and physical seizure, but it's also historical and psychological seizure. This poem attempts to converge them. It's called Truce. Some days we are bombed harbors, then silence. Other days I speak, my voice a snake, cursive in deserts. A father and son, two countries, flags whipping in wind. I know the words I need to whisper, words keeping us apart. My shirt twisted in his fist, he tugs at me. Back turned, I shake him off. My torn sleeve, a white cloth he holds up. Shots fire from my mouth. Stop. Tell me what you want. Words in our own war story, he can't answer. My son seized, ancestors trapped. Grandmother walks on boards, carries my baby mother over mud and horse shit of Tampharan. Wraps her with blankets in Topaz, their sand prison. Images sizzle in his eyes. Light forking the sky, mother blinks. Like my son, she doesn't know the words. Bedtime stories, a nightly clash. My hands guiding his head, forcing him back to the page. Rain on tin, hum of songs, her father missing. Empty deserts, shudder of flags, the mouth and its silent dust. Between quiet and the noise, I reach the edge, almost surrender. So with Halloween coming up, I don't know what's happening in all the different places where you live, but we usually get 300 to 400 trick-or-treaters, and this year I don't think it's happening. I loved Halloween as a child. I still love it, but I became conflicted because my son is on a ketogenic diet. He's not allowed to have any sugar. And when the 300 to 400 trick-or-treaters come to our door, he gets very agitated yet excited. And so this is about my love-hate relationship with Halloween, but other things too. It's called Give and Take. And just so you know, my partner's name is Grace. Give and Take. A ghost mother stands at our front door, witch daughter by her side. Wind blows through us. Outside each house lit with jack-o'-lanterns, squinting their triangle fires. My son is a lion, runs in circles, screaming, hi, hi, hi. Grace and I don't go out much. He's too loud. He glows inside with ancient women burning. Epilepsy is sacred. Epilepsy is profane. Trick or treat. I offer the candy bowl. I have little left. Our son can't eat sweets. Grace measures his meals. We steady him with ketosis. The little witch takes a starburst. I can give this much. He slows, comes to my side, his hand cold as stone. Brendan is a cathedral, radiant as Joan of Arc with her visions. Can I have another? Her small hand grabs at the bowl. I pull away. No more. So I guess this is a themed reading because I thought, wow, what am I going to read today? So I thought the World Series is happening. I have no stake in it, but a lot of my friends do. So it's really relaxing. It's great being in that position as a sports fan. And I wanted to read a short poem about how my father and I used to throw the baseball in the backyard and what that meant to me with my son, Brendan. It's called Field. I kneel, roll the foam ball slow across the rug to you. Blur of red seams, white sphere of memory. Lights orbit above green fields. Leaves scud off the mound. Leg kicked high, I rocket pitches into my dad's mitt. Baseball, father, autumn, words you can't say. Just this simple game. Catch, I repeat. Eyes wavering, you sit, reach out. Circling world, small planet. Past your hands, it keeps spinning. Okay, this final poem is for Charlie and Susan. I feel a kinship to them. They just seem super cool. I can just tell. And we're also fortunate to be with Four Way. Thank you again, Sally, for being here in Arizona, where you have air conditioning, thank goodness. And thank you again to Becky and Joe and the rest of you for this wonderful opportunity. So the reason this is for Charlie and Susan is about music. And my brother's a cellist. And, you know, Susan had mentioned Led Zeppelin. You know, Charlie, we know, loves music. So this is for them. But my father's plays a trombone, didgeridoo, other instruments, and my son, I believe, his language, music, is one of his main languages. It's called Gold and Oak. The deaf hear music like gold coins in their stomachs. My boy is an oak, receives the wind of our conversation, catches scattered leaves of our words. My father's brass, my brother's string, makes sense to him. Gold comes out clear from the slide. Laughter folds inside the bell's rim. Ducks fly out, wonk and quack in air. A sound forest. Oak hums bright, then deep. The bow smooths out the noise in his head. Brown eyes lit from inside my gilded sapling. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That was wonderful. That was really wonderful. And I really appreciated it. It was like just a little slice of your life. And that was a lovely, lovely tribute to your son and your dad and your grandmother. And that's wonderful. So I don't see that we have, let's see, that we have any questions at this point. And Charlie and Susan, feel free to unmute yourselves. I mean, if you would like. If there's, would y'all like to ask maybe a question of each other or anything on that, just to kind of end up the evening a little bit?
Okay.
I was gonna have to come prepared with questions. Come on now.
I'll ask Susan a question.
Serious?
And then definitely Charlie. But Susan, I was really struck by your story. And one thing I admired about it was use of second person. It's something that I tell my students to be careful of, you know, as storytellers. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was a book called Bright Lights, Big City many years ago.
Yeah.
And I think the whole novel was in second person. And so I would just love to hear how you chose. I was wondering if you chose that point of view initially or if it turned towards that, because I often find I change points of view when I write a piece that helps make it more effective. But love to hear about that choice of the you.
Well, I wrote all those stories. First of all, I wanted to say, Brian and Charlie, your poems were so beautiful, and it was so great to hear you guys read. I wrote a series of stories about that same guy, and it was they were all started in second person, and it's just, there's something about second person for me that's so freeing. I remember when I was in college reading a Lori Moore story that's in second person, which I embarrassingly can't remember the title of the story, but I remember I felt like my head was going to split open because I like immediately started writing stories in second person. It's just, I don't know, I just felt so free. I actually did write a whole novel in second person that was roundly rejected, but mostly because the big comment was like, the second person's totally annoying. I love it. I don't know, I feel really free writing in second person. I feel like I write a lot of, I've written a lot of personal essays about parenting actually in second person. I just feel like I can say more things. And even if I switch them to first after the, even they come out in second person and I try to switch them to first, there's something about it that just isn't the same. So.
I just wanted to comment that first of all, Sally put the name of the novel, I think, in the chat, so you can pretend that you didn't see that. And just, oh, I remember now. I think it's called How to Be Another Woman. Is that? Yeah. But I was just going to say that that's a really cool answer. And for me, in writing this recent book, it was a big decision, especially in terms of Brendan, the son, and it really changed the tone of the poem, at times. And also it prevented the overuse of the word Brendan. So I think there's a question in the chat from my friend Jay. So Becky, do you want to?
Yes, and there's actually one that followed it right. I mean, that preceded it right before. Can you talk about writing in quarantine? That was one that was kind of a general question. So anybody want to kind of address that quickly, and then we'll go on to Jay's question.
I think Charlie, because he has
hard
books.
Yeah, it's. I mean, my writing really happens in lots of fits and starts, and I think that most of the time these days what happens, and actually it sort of precedes the quarantine, and is really just like, I think since I became a parent, I've been just sort of, jotting down certain words or lines or phrases here and there. And then whenever I have a little bit of time, taking them and seeing if there's something in those words that I find compelling or there's some connection in them. But it's, I think like anything, it's hard because so many things just blur together right now. To say, okay, I have this chunk of time that I can dedicate to this thing. So it happens in, in little bits and moments here and there. I think, writing poems, and especially lately writing shorter poems, it's a little bit, I imagine it's a little bit easier. I mean, I couldn't even possibly conceive of trying to write, a larger project right now. And to sort of keep all of the parts of it in my head, so anybody who is doing that, I feel impressed and sympathy for, impressed by and sympathy for.
Thank you, Charlie. So there was a question to Susan. Susan, what are some differences or similarities between teaching writing in a New York public schools and teaching to incarcerated women?
Well, the only difference, I mean, there's actually just the big difference is just teaching in school, because there's more of, like in K through 12 schools, those lessons are around not only teaching poetry, but also, teaching devices, literary techniques. And there's more, it feels like there's more accountability that, like from the school, that somehow this might help with testing or stuff like that. Not that there's not accountability in other types of teaching or anything like that, but I guess there's just more, it feels like slightly more confined in school, in like, whereas in other places, including in with incarcerated women, it feels so much freer. And also the with when you're in school, I mostly teach middle school age, and I feel like it's so there's so much effort to try to just get a lot of the students to like open themselves up to writing, whereas in a maximum security prison, the women, it's like they're so they're so open to writing. It's incredible. And it's just like an incredible experience being with them. Not that it's not incredible to be with middle school students. It's just like it's a different muscle, I guess, I mean, that's really incredible too, when it's happening. But I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it's very interesting that you say that teaching in the schools is not as free. You feel more free teaching incarcerated women. And I can see your point. I used to work for the Austin School District for years, and so I could see where you're coming from. And I would think that women who are incarcerated, this might be one of their few outlets that they would have for creativity and to do this. Whereas in middle school, they're probably bombarded with tons of things that they could be doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Let's see. Leona asks, I'd like to ask Brian how his identity as an Asian American informs his identity as a father of a son with physical and cognitive challenges. I was taken with the poem Truce and wonder if other poems in the collection tread this ground.
Thank you. Well, this must be Leona, who's a wonderful poet in her own right, Leona Sevic, so check out her work. Yeah, thank you, Leona. The book, so one of the difficult decisions in crafting the book or putting it together touches upon this idea that should this be a book just about the father-son relationship and my experience with my son? And what I found is that I was writing a lot of other thematic pieces that linked to either Japanese American history, Asian American identity, post-traumatic stress disorder of Vietnam War veterans, and even, racial violence and police brutality. And so what I would say is that my argument of the book and the fact that I put the poems together is that Asian American or Asian Pacific American identity is inseparable from my role as a father. So I think that the poems don't always use cultural markers, but they definitely weave in and out of sort of talking about it. And so that was just one example, the idea of the silence that my mother and ancestors had about their trauma, and then my son's own silence due to not having language. But there's also a poem about the racial slur Jap, and it's actually titled that in the book. And that's about the way that my mother gets marked by that word and how my father, in a sense, stands up to the person who said it. And I, as a mixed race person, attempt to navigate and straddle those cultural worlds. And so, I guess the way I would describe it is that the book attempts to converge and synthesize the sort of identity as a father, the identity as a son, the identity as Asian American, and make those inseparable and resonating and complicating through the poetry, but hopefully not in a polemic way, but in a more narrative, lyrical way where those connections are made by the readers. Leona, does that answer your question? I mean, I'd love to talk to you more about that because Leona is also Asian American and mixed race, as I understand. So it's an awesome question. I mean, it's funny because I'm like, I hope Leona, can she put in the chat bar? That made no sense. Or that was somewhat coherent.
Well, thank y'all so much. It's been a wonderful event. I really appreciate it. And everyone who joined us, thank you so much. Again, another plug from Malvern. If anybody is interested in purchasing any of these great books, please give us a call at some point at Malvern 512-322-2097 or give us an email at info@malvernbooks.com. So we'll be tying it up here, but thank you so much, everyone, for being here with us. And to our readers, Brian, Susan, Charlie, thank you so much. Yes, big applause.